Economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa begins to rise as one of the region's largest economies, Nigeria, leads the way.
Imagine a day when malaria no longer poses a public health challenge. That's the aim of Nigeria's Federal Ministry of Health with the help of the World Health Organization.
Kung Fu movies make a hit in Malawi thanks to the hard work of 4 acrobats in Lilongwe who just released their first film. Africa 54 starts right now.
Hello and thanks for tuning into the show that goes around the continent to bring you stories from near and far. I'm Chamberlain Uso at Channels Television here in Lagos. I'm joined by my colleague at Voice of America in Washington.
Well, thanks a lot. I'm Vincent McCory at our global headquarters in Washington, D.C. Happy to be with you again for another edition of Africa 54. Let's start off with a look at economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa. Chamberlain also in Lagos brings you that story.
Indeed, the economy in sub-Saharan Africa is recovering, with a rebound being led by the region's largest economies, including Nigeria. A recent report by the World Bank's New Africa's Pulse says improving commodity prices such as gold have helped regional support. But the pace of recovery could be better. Here's our report.
In the World Bank's Africa Pulse, growth in the region is forecast to be 2.4% in 2017, down from the 2.6% it projected in April. But growth was seen rising to 3.2% in 2018 and 3.5% in 2019, unchanged from earlier this year. Sub-Saharan Africa's growth was an estimated 1.3% in 2016, and that's the lowest for 2 decades. According to the report, which is a biannual analysis of the state of African economies, the region will be helped by better commodity prices. Nigeria, Africa's biggest economy, came out of its first recession in 25 years in the second quarter as oil revenues rose following the cessation of militant attacks on energy facilities in the Niger Delta that cut crude production by around a third last year. The pace of growth was slow.
The growth in the region is being led by the largest economies. In the second quarter of 2017, Nigeria exited a 5-quarter recession, and South Africa emerged from 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. Angola is also seeing a pickup in economic activity. Elsewhere in the region, there is considerable heterogeneity in growth performance. Metal exporters are seeing a boost in economic activity, supported by higher production in mining, as well as a recovery in agriculture.
The bank says Nigeria's expected 1% growth in 2017 was 0.2% points below the April forecast because the increase in oil projections due to maintenance work. Growth in Africa's second biggest economy, South Africa, is projected to rise from 0.6% in 2017 to 1.1% in 2018 and 1.7% in 2019. The forecast for 2019 was revised down by 0.3%. Sub-Saharan Africa's recovery is expected to be partly driven by Nigeria and South Africa, which also exited recession in the second quarter.
We're still in a very, very tight, situation when it comes to fiscal space. And debt has been increasing in a number of countries. And it is, therefore, so important and imperative for our countries to continue with proper fiscal adjustments, but also implement structural reforms that will strengthen Africa's resilience and boost productivity.
Economists strongly suggest that deeper reforms are needed for these 2 countries, which make up about half of sub-Saharan Africa's GDP growth, to get back to pre-2014 levels of growth, as well as political stability for sustainable growth.
Economic growth is an indicator in measuring development of any area, just like other aspects of people's lives, including social and political. Well, joining us now to talk about Africa's democracy is Professor Nick Cheeseman, a professor of democracy at the University of Birmingham and founder of democracyinafrica.org. He joins us from Birmingham in the UK. Thank you for joining us today, Professor.
My pleasure.
Could you tell us, because you've been involved in some aspects of African democracies, what dominant challenges have you identified while you've monitored and been involved?
So what we're seeing a lot of the time is electoral controversies where very close elections in countries like Kenya, in Zambia, in Zimbabwe are leading to very disputed outcomes. And at the minute, that seems to be one of the biggest challenges we face on the continent.
Well, what would you recommend in terms of what kind of steps should we be taking to sort that out?
It's a very difficult one. I mean, it requires a number of different things, some of which are easy to achieve and some of which are very difficult to achieve. I mean, one is obviously ruling parties that are willing to lose power. And I think most people would say going into the next election in Zimbabwe, for example, next year, that President Robert Mugabe is not willing to lose power, and therefore holding elections in a context in which you're not willing to lose power is always going to generate controversy. I think, though, there are steps that can be taken. Protecting electoral commissions, making them more independent, giving them greater control of their own budgets and activities, reducing the ability of ruling parties to influence those electoral commissions. Those are all ways that we can try and give people greater confidence in elections and strengthen the electoral process and therefore try and reduce the level of controversy around elections in the future. And I think one of the things we need to start seeing is more effective and independent electoral commissions. We have seen that in some countries. We saw that in Ghana under Faris Jan, the chairman there. In Nigeria, Jega, the commissioner of the INEC. So we have seen electoral commissions on the continent do this, but unfortunately at the minute, those really positive examples are the minority.
Well, that also leads us now to the electorate themselves. Those countries that you mentioned, I think they play a huge role as well. Do you think that the electorate in those other African countries are living up to their responsibilities, for instance, including civil society organizations as well?
I think there's a lot of great civil society organizations that are doing a great job. Many of them are very brave and are operating under very difficult circumstances. We also see some concerns. I mean, we did some research in Ghana, and one of the things we found in Ghana is that while people want democracy and while they're very active voters, where we see people very engaged in elections, we also see voters actually demanding some kinds of behavior that are problematic. So, for example, many politicians telling us and many voters telling us that actually to be effective, politicians need to hand out small amounts of money, something small, a t-shirt and so on, in the areas in which they're campaigning. And so one of the things we see in countries like Ghana is democratic norms and values, the importance of elections are being consolidated, but so are at the same time kind of patronage relationships and electoral bribery and forms of giving out money around elections that are problematic because, of course, you want people to evaluate their candidates on the basis of the merits and their experience and their performance in office, and not because of the money that's being handed out around elections. Now, we know that African electorates are more sophisticated than that. It's not simply the case that they're voting on the basis of who gives them the most money, but the use of money in politics in that kind of way makes campaigns very expensive. It means that often we see MPs who get into parliament already indebted because they borrowed a lot of money to stand. And of course that then means that MPs are perhaps more susceptible to things like corruption because they need so much money to retain their seats.
All right, Professor Cheeseman, thank you for joining us today on Africa 54.